over 500,000. That's how many enemy soldiers these 5 American generals killed, wounded, or captured during the Civil War. Not the ones who died from disease or starvation later. Not the civilians caught in the crossfire. Just the raw combat toll, the men who fell on the fields of Virginia, Tennessee, Georgia, and the Shenandoah. These weren't just commanders who won battles. They were the ones who broke armies, shattered lines, and made the other side pay in blood until one side finally broke. Everyone knows Ulysses S. Grant, the quiet man from Ohio who wouldn't quit, the one who hammered Robert E. Lee until the Confederacy folded. But here's the thing, he's not number one. Not when you look at the cold mathematics of enemy casualties inflicted, total verified losses on the opposing side, exchange ratios, territory taken or held, strategic impact that changed the war, and the sheer fear these men put into their enemies. This ranking isn't about who was the nicest guy or who had the best press. It's about who sent the most of the other side into the ground or the prison camps. It's based on the best historical records we have, battle reports, official tallies, campaign summaries. Numbers that historians still debate, sure, but numbers that don't lie when you add them up. Let's count them down. Number 5 to number 1. The 5 most lethal American generals of the Civil War. Number 5, Philip Sheridan. This was a man who didn't just fight wars, he scorched the earth behind him. Born in New York, raised in Ohio, West Point graduate who barely scraped through. By 1864, he was Grant's attack dog in the Shenandoah Valley. And Grant gave him one simple order: turn that breadbasket of the Confederacy into a wasteland so Lee's army starved. Sheridan didn't hesitate. At Winchester in September 1864, his forces slammed into Jubal Early's Confederates. The fighting was brutal, close quarters, bayonets, artillery duels that turned orchards into graveyards. Sheridan's men inflicted over 5,000 casualties that day alone. Early's army staggered back. Then, at Fisher's Hill a few days later, another 1,200 Confederates down. Cedar Creek in October. Early tried one last desperate counterattack at dawn. Sheridan was 20 miles away in Winchester when he heard the guns. He jumped on his horse and rode like hell for the front. That ride became legend. Sheridan's Ride! He rallied his broken troops, turned the battle around, and crushed Early for good. By the end of the Valley Campaign, Sheridan's command had inflicted more than 15,000 Confederate casualties, killed, wounded, captured. His own losses? Around 5,000. That's a 3-to-1 ratio in a war where most commanders were lucky to break even. But it wasn't just the bodies. Sheridan burned barns, mills, railroads, crops. He called it making the Shenandoah a barren waste. Confederate soldiers wrote home that there wasn't a chicken or a blade of wheat left for 50 miles. Lee's army started feeling the hunger in their bellies by Christmas. The Confederates learned the hard way. When Sheridan showed up, retreat or die. One Southern officer said the man fought like a demon with a grin on his face. That grin cost the South an entire valley and the food to feed its capital. Sheridan didn't just win battles, he ended the Confederacy's ability to keep fighting them, and that's why he cracks our top 5. Number 4, Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Picture a quiet, odd professor from Virginia Military Institute, religious to the point of eccentricity, sucked on lemons, stood like a statue in battle, so still that his own men nicknamed him Stonewall at First Manassas, but put him in command of a few thousand men with room to move, and he became the most terrifying tactical mind the South ever produced. Spring of 1862, the Shenandoah Valley. Jackson had maybe 17,000 men. The Union had 3 separate armies closing in, over 50,000 total. Most commanders would have fallen back. Jackson attacked. He marched his foot cavalry so fast they covered 646 miles in 48 days. At Front Royal, he smashed a Union garrison and took 700 prisoners. At Winchester, he routed another force and captured supplies the South desperately needed. Cross Keys, Port Republic, each time he hit one Union column before the others could reinforce. By the end of the campaign, he had inflicted more than 5,000 Union casualties and captured another 3,000 prisoners. His own losses? Under 3,000. The Union generals chasing him were left dizzy. One of them wrote that Jackson moved faster than the telegraph could carry the news. Lincoln himself kept pulling troops from other fronts just to try to catch him. And that was the point. While Jackson danced in the valley, he kept tens of thousands of Union soldiers away from Richmond at the exact moment Lee needed breathing room. Then came Chancellorsville in May 1863. Lee and Jackson against Hooker's 130,000. Jackson took his corps on a 12-mile flank march through thick woods on a Sunday afternoon. At dusk, he hit the Union right like a thunderbolt. His men rolled up the line for 2 miles. The Union 11th Corps disintegrated, over 2,000 casualties in minutes, another 4,000 captured or missing. Total Union losses at Chancellorsville topped 17,000. Jackson's men paid with about 8,000 of their own, but the blow they landed was devastating. Jackson's men worshipped him. They would follow him anywhere. The Yankees feared him like death itself. One captured Union soldier said, "If that man Jackson is loose, we might as well go home." Tragically, his own troops shot him by mistake in the dark after his greatest victory. He died 8 days later. Lee called it losing his right arm. The South never really recovered, but in the months he commanded, Stonewall Jackson inflicted far more damage than any man his size had a right to. Pure lethal efficiency. That's why he sits at number 4. Number 3, William Tecumseh Sherman. "War is hell," he said, and he meant it. Red-haired, nervous, prone to depression, but when he got rolling, nothing could stop him. By 1864, he was commanding the armies driving into Georgia. His opponent at first was the cautious Joe Johnston. Sherman flanked him again and again. Rocky Face Ridge, Resaca, New Hope Church. Each time Johnston fell back, leaving dead and wounded behind. Then John Bell Hood took over and attacked. Peachtree Creek, the Battle of Atlanta, Hood lost 8,000 men in 2 days. Sherman's losses were lighter. By the time Atlanta fell in September 1864, the Confederates had suffered around 35,000 casualties in the campaign. Sherman's armies paid about 31,000, but that was just the beginning. November 15th, 1864, Atlanta burned behind him. Sherman cut loose from his supply lines with 60,000 men and marched southeast across Georgia. No railroads, no telegraphs, just 4 columns tearing up everything the Confederacy needed to keep fighting. They ripped up 300 miles of track, burned depots, destroyed cotton gins, seized livestock. Confederate resistance was scattered, mostly cavalry and home guards. Sherman lost maybe 2,300 men total. The South lost another few thousand in skirmishes, plus tens of thousands of slaves who walked away from plantations and followed the blue columns to freedom. When he reached Savannah on December 21st, he presented Lincoln with the city as a Christmas present. Then he turned north into the Carolinas. More destruction, more broken railroads, more despair in the Confederate ranks. One Southern woman wrote in her diary that Sherman's men made war more terrible than anything the world has ever seen. Lee in Virginia felt the pressure. His supply lines were being strangled. Sherman didn't just kill soldiers. He killed the South's will to fight. He made civilians feel the war the same way soldiers did. And the numbers back it up. His campaigns cost the Confederacy well over 40,000 combat casualties, plus an economic blow worth millions. The Confederacy never recovered. That's why Sherman lands at number 3. He didn't just win the war in the West, he ended it. Number 2, Ulysses S. Grant. The man who wouldn't take no for an answer. Failed businessman, failed farmer, but when the war came, he found his calling. He didn't look like much, short, rumpled, cigar in his mouth. But he understood one brutal truth. The North could replace losses. The South could not. Start with Forts Henry and Donelson in February 1862. Grant took both with fewer than 3,000 casualties of his own and captured 16,000 Confederates. Then Shiloh, surprised on the first day, he held on and counterattacked the second. 13,000 Union casualties, but the Confederates lost their commander Albert Sidney Johnston and another 11,000 men. Vicksburg, Grant's masterpiece, 7 months of marching, flanking, sieging, 9,000 Union losses, 41,000 Confederate, plus the surrender of an entire army of 30,000 on July 4, 1863. The Mississippi River was open. The Confederacy was cut in half. Then he came east in 1864. Overland campaign against Lee. The Wilderness, 2 days of hell in the brush, 17,000 Union casualties to Lee's 11,000. Spotsylvania, another bloodbath, 18,000 Union to Lee's 13,000. Cold Harbor, Grant admitted later it was a mistake, but still the lines held. By the time Grant reached the James River, he had lost 55,000 men, but Lee had lost 33,000 he could never replace. Grant kept the pressure on through Petersburg and the Appomattox campaign. When Lee surrendered on April 9, 1865, it was Grant's relentless math that had done it. Add it all up. Grant's armies across every theater inflicted roughly 191,000 Confederate casualties while suffering 154,000 of their own. He captured 3 Confederate armies outright. He never lost a major campaign. Soldiers on both sides said the same thing. Other Union generals fought until they got tired. Grant fought until the enemy was finished. But here's the twist. For all that raw destruction, he still comes in second. Because number one did something almost impossible. He inflicted even more while commanding a smaller, poorer army on the defensive for most of the war. Number one, Robert E. Lee. The Marble Man, the Virginian who turned down command of the Union Army because he could not fight against his home, elegant, dignified, deeply religious. But on the battlefield, he was a gambler who played for keeps. From the moment he took command of the Army of Northern Virginia in June 1862, he went on the attack. 7 days battles, 20,000 Confederate casualties to drive McClellan away from Richmond, but 16,000 Union dead or wounded. Second Manassas, 14,000 Union casualties for 9,000 of his own. Antietam, 12,000 Union to 11,000 Confederate. Fredericksburg, 13,000 Union, piled up in front of Mary's Heights against 4,000 Confederate. Chancellorsville, 17,000 Union losses for 13,000 Confederate, including the mortal wounding of Stonewall Jackson. Gettysburg was the high water mark and the beginning of the end. 28,000 Confederate casualties, 23,000 Union. Lee retreated, but he kept fighting. The Overland Campaign in 1864, defensive now, but still deadly. 46% of his army fell, yet he inflicted 53,000 casualties on Grant's Army of the Potomac before they reached the James. When you add every campaign, every battle from the 7 days to Appomattox, Lee's army inflicted roughly 240,000 casualties on Union forces while suffering 209,000 of their own. That's more enemy blood on the books than any other commander on either side. He did it with an army that was almost always outnumbered and outgunned. He did it while invading the North twice, trying to win the war in one bold stroke. He did it while the South's factories burned and its farms emptied. Union soldiers who faced him said the same thing over and over. Lee's army fights like devils. One Northern officer wrote home, "When you hear that Lee is in front of you, you know you're in for it." Even after Gettysburg, even after the Wilderness, even when his men were barefoot and half-starved, they still believed he could pull off one more miracle. In the end, the miracles ran out. But the numbers don't. 240,000 enemy casualties. That's the brutal math. Robert E. Lee stands alone at the top of this list, not because he won the war, but because no one else on either side made the enemy pay quite so dearly for every inch of ground. Add them up. Sheridan's valley devastation, Jackson's lightning strikes, Sherman's march of destruction, Grant's relentless grinding, and Lee's bloody masterclass. Over 500,000 enemy casualties between them, more than half the total combat toll of the entire war. That's what these 5 men did. They didn't just command armies. They decided which families would never see their sons come home. They changed the map and the future of a nation with every order they gave. The Civil War ended at Appomattox, but the cost is still with us. These generals, Union and Confederate alike, remind us that war isn't romantic. It's mathematics written in blood. Some of them we still celebrate. Some we still argue about. But the numbers don't lie. Let me know in the comments. Who did I get wrong? Should Grant be higher because he won? Should Lee be lower because the South lost? Drop your ranking below. And if this changed how you see the men who fought the Civil War, hit that like button and subscribe. There's a lot more untold history where this came from.